and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. Merry Christmas, season's greetings, whatever the appropriate thing is to say to you, whoever you are, whatever you celebrate. Or if you don't, just enjoy a few days off your work. Meanwhile, we are here providing you with all the content we normally do. Alan, did you have a decent enough couple of days over the festive period?
No, it's been really good. Eldest back from Australia. Grandparents haven't seen him for a couple of years, so very emotional. So it's been lovely. But yeah, feeling a little bit larger than I was. Went for a nice walk on the 27th, and my jacket was a little bit tighter than it should have been. I'll be honest.
I can certainly I know that feeling all too well. Although I've not always got Christmas to blame, right enough. James, how are you?
Well, much like the price of silver and gold this past week, my fat ass approached an all-time high. And so I share in Alan's disgust with the gluttony and the waistline and the tightness of clothing. So that's been the overarching feeling, unfortunately, is that I just feel like a slob. But the family side, everything else has been great. But I just need to cut out the gluttony.
Good. Well, you know, I need to cut that out as well. But I have nothing to complain about because I didn't have to do any of the cooking. You might lose a bit of weight if I did cooking for you, by the way. So that's something to
food poisoning does that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does do that. So yeah, if you're looking for a quick diet, I'll cook you a meal. It'll be fine. But yeah, we are currently sitting here between the 4-2 victory against Livingston and the upcoming games midweek against Motherwell and Rangers. So we will cover the Livingston game and then look a little bit ahead to Motherwell, and I'm sure you guys will look a little bit ahead to Rangers later on in the week. James, before we get into the nitty-gritty, Livingston away is always one that fills me with a bit of trepidation. They are a bit of a bogey team for us. You can say it's because of the plastic pitch. You can say it's because of X, Y, and Z, but they just always seem to give us a game. What did you make of the overall performance and the outcome and result of it? Were you pleased with what you saw?
On balance, I think so. I think that, I put a little tweet out earlier in the week after the game highlighting how much there's ample evidence for all involved on the pro-Nancy and anti-Nancy brigades, because it's kind of messy. There's a lot of things that you can point out that need improvement. I don't think, he's said that. This is not surprising to anyone, I think, given the circumstances in which we've all found ourselves with this transition. So on balance, I think the positives are still very much positiving. The chance creation is really good. The pitch isn't as bad as it used to be. I think they got a new one, so it's not as bad. You could play a little bit better football on it. The weather wasn't complete travesty as it can be at times this time of year. So I thought it was okay. I thought we defended set pieces okay, which, we sure as hell gave up a lot of them, which was a good improvement on the margin. And, Alan, I think, is going to get into a little bit more on the nitty gritty on some of the vulnerabilities. But on balance, I think there's still improvement, but a lot of the issues are going to just be there because of the state of the squad. They're just in a different shape and form, both literally and figuratively, tongue-in-cheek, than what they were under Rodgers and what they were under Martin O'Neill. So I think it's the difference that's causing a lot of people to be very kind of agitated and uncomfortable with it. And understandably, like when you get into basketball games of up and down, again, this is where the end point of history with Ange clouds, I think, a lot of the reality of the first 3 months of Ange's transition, where there was a lot of this. And I went over it on some of it in his first game at Hearts at Tynecastle on the Extra Time show 2 weeks ago, in kind of documenting how much space there was in midfield and transition in that game. So, this is in some ways comparable, although the details are different. There's definitely growing pains, and understandably, people were concerned about the openness in transition.
Yeah, and not to forget, I'm sure his opening few games included a poor result against Livingston as well. I can't off the top of my head remember the exact score, but so yeah, something to look out for there. Alan, let's get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty. I guess the question I have for you is, there's been a lot of concern and a lot of talk about the number of goals that Nancy has conceded over his first 4 games. The fact that even though we won against Livingston, we still conceded 2 pretty poor goals. And I guess the overall question for that is then, where do you stand on this discussion about whether we're too easy to play against? Are we too open at the back? Are we leaking far too many goals? Is that a bad thing as long as we're scoring? Where do you stand on that?
So, I mean, just by the way, on Livingston, I think we've got some, shared trauma memory. I think between 2018 and 2022, 5 games there we didn't win. But actually, we've won the last 5 and scored 16 goals against Livingston. So, I think that trauma from Lyndon Dyke days has not been completely erased yet. But this is quite a different shape to Livingston as it was. And actually, their pitch I thought was a good. It was very similar to Falkirk's one. Actually, it was a pretty good 4G, 3G, whatever it's called, pitch. So yeah, listen, the guy can't win, right? It's either we're not burying 1 of 30 chances against Dundee United. They're all crap, or it's he's crap, or it's we're giving up too many chances, but we're scoring 4 goals, but he's still crap. So we're kind of there, but I'm not going to get into all why that might be the case. But I think what we can have a good faith debate about is what are the concerns that are emerging. And as I say, I come back to it took Ange about 2 months with a pre-season to get the team really starting to tick. And we're still only what are we in 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks? I don't know. Seems like a lifetime, but it's I think 2 months would be like the beginning of February, right? So I'm not saying this is different. We are mid-season. We're going to have to just get on with it in a sense, and people will be impatient with that notion that we'd have to wait a long time to start seeing the team clicking, and that's the reality of where we are. But I would say take that up with the board, but providing Nancy's not trying to do stupid things. So listen, it was a good win. It was also a win where the opposition played in a very specific way, and that has an impact on a lot of what transpired. And because of all the early goals, and because Celtic are 2 goals up at half-time, game state comes in. You got one team that's 2 goals ahead, doesn't have to go mental and chase the game, and you got another team that's throwing forwards on and trying to turn it into, a basketball match, as James said. So you've got to understand that is legitimate context to how the game transpired, and to put Livingston into context. There is no team this season that has pressed the ball as much as Livingston did in that game. No team, not even Roma. They pressed more than Roma. They tried to play like Roma, man-to-man, full court press, and they did it more aggressively than Roma, who, again, game state, 3-0 up. They didn't need to do it. So this was a game that we were probably sucked into a bit of a basketball match that I'm sure Nancy didn't want to be pulled into, and the players could have made better decisions around passing and actually been more aggressive with their passing. We kind of invited pressure by trying to be too precise, by not passing to people that may well be marked and just taking risks a little bit to progress the ball, but then put them under pressure. Because for as much as there were situations where it was 3 against 3, in our defensive end, we could have got similar overloads had we been a bit more aggressive in our passing in the second half, especially. So there's loads of things, obviously, after however many games it's been, that need to be improved. But I wanted you to just look at that, because I was left with the same impression. Because when I went through the game and captured the data, there was an absolutely incredible number of pack passes that Livingston pulled off, and especially pack passes that didn't take out 1 or 2 players, took out the whole midfield, like all 6 players that you designate as midfielders loosely, and you end up with the ball, and then Celtic's three at the back. That happened so many times, and I thought, is that something that's endemic in the way that Nancy's setting up, and are we going to be systemically, is going to be a problem, going forward, really. So the answer to that is a little bit yes, but maybe no. So what I'm showing here is the number of pack passes that Livingston have achieved in matches at home to Celtic, got in the records that I've got. And as you can see, 100 and whatever it was, 212 pack passing score that Livingston got the weekend is easily their highest pack passing score they've ever achieved against Celtic in a home match. The last one, it was only 67. Now, some of that's down to the fact that they play a lot differently now than what they did under David, even the same manager in some of those years. They're less long ball, hoof ball. They're more building up from the back, etc. And they're probably, they're playing a little bit more progressive football. So there's that. And then just on that day, they decided to try and play like a mini Roma, and they tried to get the ball forward very quickly. And they went over the top of Celtic's press, because Celtic press a lot as well. But you would say, based on this sample, that there's a risk that Celtic are just going to get, obliterated by balls over the top, taking out the whole midfield, and then everyone's running at Ralston and so forth. I looked at Dundee United, and it was a sort of diluted version of that. So yes, by 3 points against Dundee United away. That was their highest pack passing score that they'd achieved in a home game against Celtic for all the games that I've got records. But it's not really statistically that significant. It's a lot more than what they've had in recent years. But then, if you go back before Jim Goodwin, Dundee United had a reputation for playing more sort of progressive passing game. Jim Goodwin is much more of a kind of long ball. So you might expect that anyway. So I would say that's kind of inconclusive. So then I looked at breaking down the managers, looked at each of their matches. How many times had the whole midfield? So this is instances of the whole midfield being taken out by one pass. So under Rodgers, it was about 11 times a game, which actually surprised me a little bit how much that was, 11.33. Under Martin O'Neill, it went down a little bit to 11.2. And under Nancy so far in league matches, it's gone up a bit to 12. So I would say that that's kind of inconclusive. I would say that to some degree, we're a little bit easier to play through, but I don't think that's really conclusive yet. I think what was more relevant at the weekend was the specific way that Livingston were set up to play, and the fact that they were throwing everything at it in the second half because there were 2 goals down. So I'm my jury's out. I'm not saying that Celtic aren't easier to play through under Nancy. I'm saying it's not conclusive yet by any means, and there are legitimate reasons why the numbers in the last couple of away games have been, slightly higher than averages against those sides. And by the way, at home to Hearts, their pack passing score was much lower than what they usually achieve at Celtic Park. So I think that's an unproven sentiment if we're saying that we're easier to play against.
James, Alan's talked about some of the reasons why the game went the way that it went. You've both mentioned it looking like a basketball match. I've got to admit, yes, we're leaking goals. Yes, we look vulnerable at the back against a lot of much better teams. We are going to come up against serious problems if we don't improve that. But domestically, against the majority of opposition, it's my belief that we have the resources and the players to outscore that opposition. And I personally would much rather watch the type of game that we have been watching under Nancy, assuming we win, obviously. It's just more fun to watch, and it's less cautious, and it's less totally possession-based, and it's less about always just trying to create the lowest XG chance, the highest XG chance that you can, sorry. I mean, where do you stand on that? Because there's a little bit of me I'm just a little bit like, you know what, I'm happy to give up the odd stupid goal here and there if it's just going to be a more entertaining game overall.
I was very kind of bullish when I first looked at Nancy, when I applied the kind of evaluation process that I created when the news came out that we were hiring Ange, and I had no idea who the hell he was. And I was like, well, how am I going to analyze if he's good or not? So I came up with this process, and I've been evolving it over the last few years. And when I applied that to Nancy, I was like, wow, this actually grades out better than what Ange did when I looked at Ange. I'm not saying it's like a perfect framework or anything. I'm just saying that that's what it kind of was speaking to me. Equally ignorant about both of them. You know, I'll get the American accent. You know, MLS. I don't watch any MLS. I didn't know anything about Nancy. Certainly haven't.
That's like me in women's football. People ask me about women's football. I'm like, I've never watched it in my life. I don't know.
You're a self-hater like I am, apparently.
Yeah. It's my internal misogyny.
Yeah. So despite the understandable, logical inference that I would know something about him, I didn't, and similar to Ange. And I have to say, as things have been unfolding, independent of the first 4 horrible results, my optimism has been increasing and evolving, where I think actually the way that he plays may end up being a really smart strategic decision, if this is in fact a strategic decision. And we'll get into that probably on extra time later in the week. We'll have the nasty Paul Tisdale conversation in more depth and all of these other things. And when I say nasty, meaning that there's a lot of people that have a lot of nasty opinions on Mr. Tisdale. So we'll get into that. So I'm and I say this up front, my anchoring bias is positive. So I'm vulnerable to that. And I try to self-check that constantly because I know that's how I'm oriented here. So refresh my memory. What was the question? I'm old.
Just are you in my boat as far as
yes
it being a little bit more fun to watch it if it's a little bit less cautious?
I got into narcissistic discussion about myself is that because of that bias I have to check, but within that I do think that there is a strategic value that was similar, and I got this wrong when I analyzed Ange to begin with, is I didn't understand, as I would call it, the skew in his style of play and how it manifests in Scotland because of the resource advantage, is that if you take more risk in attacking the box, you're going to pay for it less because the opposition just isn't good enough to kind of punish you to a degree. Now we're dealing with a different circumstance here. The squad's nowhere near as good. So this kind of flattens that skew in the short to intermediate term, potentially. I don't think we're going to wave a magic wand and fix everything in January. I mean, you'd have to be an absolute lunatic to think that that's within the likely scenario for Celtic, the way that we've been managed in recent history. I guess anything's possible, but I think strategically it makes sense. And actually, if you think about things just from the rest of the season perspective, this is why when I first looked at Nancy, right away, I was like, the way he plays gives us a better chance to win the league than if Martin O'Neill was retained for the rest of the season. That was my analytical conclusion. Again, people can disagree. That's fine. Because I think we'll drop less points in the bread and butter games. And this is the exact opposite of what I think Alan shares this analysis too, that Hearts, for example, they could win all of their derby matches, but they're going to drop a ton of points to other teams in the league like St. Mirren and Kilmarnock because they play so much kind of chaos ball under Derek McInnes that it just introduces too much randomness for them to be really, really consistent. So I think there is, above and beyond the entertainment part, like I'm all in on the entertainment side. I'd much rather watch a 4-2 game than a 1-0 grind it out in December type of game. I think, a lot of people are like that. But I do think that there is actually a strategic, and even for this rest of the season, argument to be made that, being overly aggressive to a degree gives us a better chance, even if that means the back door is open, even if that means we give up more chances. And it has to be said that already in these games, Dundee United and Livingston players are finishing like peak Messi. These guys are putting shots on, the goal at Dundee United, top shelf in the corner. Both finishes that the guy from Livingston scored were, thunder bastards. I mean, they put it right on target. And I think the one Sinisala maybe probably should have done a little better on, or, a lot better on. But they made, solid contact, well placed. Like, that doesn't always happen when you're playing Livingston. And that's by definition the quality of player. They're just not as good in in executing some of those finishes. So I think on balance, that stuff will break our direction and makes it worth us having the 6, sometimes 7 guys around the opposition box. And because that is, I mean, we are creating chances at a level that is not only going up, but the average quality of the chances are right back to like peak Ange-ball level. And that, if you just do a basic statistical analysis, that's going to skew probabilities heavily in our favor. Whereas opposition quality is low, much lower. So they might get more shots, which is, again, making people uncomfortable, understandably. But on balance, most of those shots are not high quality, and they're players of a material lower level. That's, I think, a good risk reward for us.
Interesting that you say, James, that if they win all their derby matches, because Hearts, of course, did not win their derby match at the weekend, which I was quite delighted to see. But yeah, we can talk about that another time. Alan, it's a difficult thing to assess and come to a conclusion on the reasons for the vulnerabilities. Where do you stand on it in terms of, there were certainly players against Livingston, Anthony Ralston being one of them, who you could argue was individually a poor performer, and I'm sure you could pick other names out. Do you feel like the vulnerabilities are down to individuals or down to the system, or is it a mixture of both?
Yeah, so this is where you need to be kind of careful and fair and balanced, and as James said, not sort of fall back on your biases of thinking, yeah, this is all going to work and it's going to be great. Which I'm not really in that camp, actually. I remain a kind of a hopeful skeptic, I think, is the way I would characterize my position on this. But I thought it was quite interesting, actually, just looking at the first 2 goals that were conceded in the first 10 minutes the weekend there. And listen, this was one of these crazy games. It doesn't happen very often. 4 goals in 10 minutes. And actually, there was a glut of defensive errors at both ends of the field that really led to those goals. But what I was trying to think about as I was watching the game was, well, how much of this is down to the system? Can we say, oh, well, because we're playing this way, that has led to, on an attribution basis, X% led to this chance, versus it's just either it's a piece of brilliance from an individual on the opposition, or an individual error from a player that doesn't matter whether you're 4-4-2, 5-4-1, or whatever, would have got you in a lot of trouble. And I think the opening goal, I would say, is potentially one of those where you that's basically taking your medicine for trying to play a certain way because of the system, and it all kind of falling down, but then you compound it with individual errors. So Tierney trying to play a blind pass across the pitch, which most players are told not to do, and Tierney, actually, by the way, maybe we'll come on to him later. I think he's been really good, but he had a very bad moment there, trying to play that blind pass, playing it behind Engels, and then Yang was well in advance of the ball, and the Livingston defender, left back, did a good job of anticipating that quicker than Yang did. But the point was, so 2 things really in terms of how does that relate to the system. One is you're going to see an awful lot of those inside passes. This is how Nancy wants to play. Inside passes, normally not straight ones like square ones that Tierney played. Normally they'd be diagonal. And this is why I can't wait. I just hope Sirachi gets fit again, because he is brilliant at playing diagonal passes inside. He's absolutely perfect for playing left wing back in this system. He's honestly. So I think Tierney was trying to play an inside pass, and he just screwed it up. It was too square, and I don't think he looked properly. So credit to the Livingston guy for latching onto it. But then you have really sort of 2 defensive errors that compound it. One is that Yang hasn't anticipated it as quickly as the Livingston guy, but he does a decent job of getting back because he's quick. But the main issue is really Ralston, who basically defends too optimistically. So because he sees Yang closing in on Montano, and actually Yang gets a foot on the ball and makes the tackle, which only served to knock the ball perfectly in front of the goal from Montano to lash home. But Ralston, unfortunately, assumes that Yang therefore has got this covered, rather than just going, this looks like a bad situation, I'm going to step over and if I take everybody, I take everybody. But I'm going to do something about this. He took an optimistic view, and should never ever be optimistic. Your defender should always be pessimistic and assume that the worst is going to happen. And then, so I would say that's part system, part individual. But I think the second goal was more individual, frankly, and it was actually the reverse of the situation that we saw in the first goal with the same two players, where Yang decides to be proactive and, I'll go and help my lad, Ralston, because the ball's coming towards his man. So I'm going to crash in there too and completely leave the guy I'm supposed to be marking. So he tries to be positive and do something and be pessimistic that Ralston's not going to win the ball. But in doing so, he leaves his man completely. Yang isn't a right back, and he probably never has been. But also, it highlights two of the weakest areas of the team. And it didn't matter whether we're playing 4-4-2 or 4-3-2-1 or 4-2-3-1 or 4-4, whatever it might be. If you've got Ralston and Yang in the team, unfortunately, this is the situation that you might get into anyway. So I think it was a bit of a mixture. And as I say, I think the three at the back, what I'm seeing is Austin Trusty having to do an inordinate amount of work. I mean, he really is having to do a ton of work, a lot of covering, a lot of challenges, a lot of progressing the ball as well. And I think he's doing a pretty good job at it. Actually, I think he's pretty sweet in that position. But I just worry that he's got too much going through him. There's a fundamental issue with the way that we're set up, in that if you play Tony Ralston as a right centre back, he simply isn't quick enough to cover the ground, especially if you're going to have teams going over the top. And then suddenly you've got the right back area, the right half area to defend with somebody whose mobility is not great. So that's a fundamental weakness, I think, in the system. And as much as Tony Ralston might be a decent defender in the sense of his positioning is generally quite good, and his decision making wasn't the case at the weekend, but it's generally okay. That's fine. That is 90% of defending. Standing in the right position, making the right decision. If you do that 90% of the time, you're a pretty good defender, right? So the actual physical characteristics of you don't usually matter so much. But I just think he just lacks that ability to cover the ground in that position. So, long story short, Laura, I think it would be churlish to not say that there was an element of the system, aggravating some of the issues that Celtic had. But equally, listen, it's choose your poison at the moment, right? With the squad that we've got, we're going to be playing players like Yang, Ralston, Kenny, right? We just are, because that's all we've got with the injuries and so forth. So you put them in any of the systems that we've got, you're potentially going to have issues. So what we had this season, we've had Brendan Rodgers, where we actually defensively we were pretty sound because we controlled the ball. We overwhelmingly controlled the ball, but we had such a dearth in attacking areas. We're always attacking against the set defence because we were so ponderous in getting the ball up the pitch, and we don't have the quality in the final third to break down a packed defence. So we end up in this horseshoe. So that's how we start the season. Then we moved on to Martin O'Neill, and we take a huge step in terms of a change of approach. And we go back to essentially very similar football to what we played under Neil Lennon, a lot more direct, a lot less build-up, a little bit more chaotic generally, which has the advantage of getting players like Maeda perhaps running at defences in behind more often, so you're not always playing against a set defence. But the downside to it is not only the players not used to playing that way. For 4.5 years, we've built a squad to not play that way. We end up stretching the game with a midfield that's not built to run up and down all day. And we end up playing into the opposition hands in the sense of, like Livingston at the weekend, they want to play this way. They want to drag Celtic into a basketball match. And even simple things like, if you play this way, the ball's not in play that often. You get more set pieces, not only to defend, maybe to attack, but also to defend. And so that doesn't play to Celtic's strengths. That always plays to the opposition's strengths. And then, games can often become a mess. And yes, results were good. Performances were pretty ugly. Or you have Nancy, where you have a very fluid attack. You have quite complex movements and passing patterns, and you're creating lots of chances. But as Livingston showed at the weekend, it's actually quite easy to go right over the top of Celtic's midfield and have 3-on-3. And as you said, Laura, that are you willing to accept that, like with Ange, will be exposed, especially in the wide areas, and that the opposition will get a few good chances in a game, and then the gamble is the quality of those forwards good enough to take advantage of it, versus the volume of chances that Celtic are producing at the other end, which has been high from game one and is now increasing, actually. So choose your poison, because with this squad, none of these are great options.
Alan, it's almost like we spent 2 years talking about how often teams would just shell the ball behind Greg Taylor with Starfelt, right? I mean, that was what a lot of teams did to try and combat Ange-ball, was a lot of the same stuff, just a different kind of shape. But again, when I went through this on extra time, I mean, we oftentimes had 3 defending. That was it under Ange-ball. The specifics on the overloads and the movement and all that was different. Nancy's doing some different things, but leaving the back door kind of open with just McGregor there and maybe 2 center backs at times, Starfelt and then Starfelt launching himself forward to try and prevent the counterattacks. If it wasn't an aerial one, I mean, that was, I mean, didn't we spend 2 years talking about that, Alan? Refresh my memory.
Yes. 3, I think.
3.
It's interesting, but it does make me worry that the mention of Trusty and the amount of work he's having to do, that is not something that Carter Vickers is going to be able to withstand. And where you play him in a system where he can't be the centre of the back 3, I don't know, but
Laura, this goes back to a lot of the criticism that I read and hear about how Nancy has been ideological and he's come in and completely shifted things. I get the strong sense that many of the people levying that charge didn't and haven't really looked at what he did at Columbus Crew. Mm-hmm. Because guess who was the middle of his back 3 at Columbus Crew? Guess what? He's a converted something, Laura. Guess what? He wasn't always a center back. Guess what he used to be?
I mean, based on what Trusty's having to do, it's got to be a fullback or a winger or something. No,
defensive midfielder.
Really?
He was like a sweeper midfielder or a stopper or whatever you want. He was in the middle, sweeping up all the time. Mm-hmm. And that, if you kind of think about his system, he's a big guy. I mean, he's not Cal McGregor. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that, but the extent to which he's been incremental with what he's doing. If you look at how he played at Columbus Crew, there's a large degree of incrementalism here. So if you think this is radical, wait till you see what's coming, baby.
Yeah. No, so we've seen I've talked about the diagonal inside passes. We've seen the third man runs. We've seen the pick and moves. That's all there. It's not always working, but when it does, it's brilliant. It looks great, and we've carved teams open with 2 or 3 passes. What you're not seeing is all the more sort of relational aspects, to use the term, the kind of people coming from the right wing and we saw Yang win the ball back against Aberdeen on the left, etc. That was more of one of these occasions where a professional loses the ball and thinks, "Shit, I better win it back." But when this is really, we're not seeing the fluidity in positional play that he got to with Columbus, and as James says, oh boy. But that's that. So any charges against him that he's trying to do too much too soon, I would say, no, he's actually going at this on a relative basis, reasonably cautiously.
Yeah, Liam Scales just needs to remember that we have to actually have 1 possession back before he bombs forward. That's all he needs to remember. But James, let's look at some of the positives before we go on to look at the Motherwell game. Alan, I'll come back to talk to you specifically about Kieran Tierney, who I know you were itching to talk about there and some of what he's doing well. But James, in a more general sense, for all the frailties of the system and some of the individual frailties, there are players who are thriving in it. There are players who are seeing the benefit of playing the way they're being asked to play. Who's standing out for you just now in terms of players who might be having a little bit more of a positive time under Nancy than they maybe were under Rodgers?
Well, I'll start this by saying, again, declaring my bias. Our new manager has said the C word more times in 2 weeks than I think any manager, in cumulative in the last 10 years, our managers have said. And I don't mean the one that you're thinking, Laura.
Well, I have been saying that one as well, but yeah.
Oh, okay. It's coherent. And I would argue it's coherent for your English Premier League level player who was getting, some minutes as an attacking left winger at Arsenal not that long ago, to be the player that plays the most passes from open play, which is what happened against Livingston. So rather than having Liam Scales and Cameron Carter-Vickers be your endless guys recycling the ball back and forth, to have your fulcrum of attack passing through arguably your most skilled and best player, I would argue is kind of coherent, right? And it might seem unorthodox for people to think, well, he's playing left center back. Well, part of being coherent is dealing with the hand that you're dealt. And if that's your best player, maybe you want him on the ball the most. And
Andy's done that a lot for Scotland. He's been forced into that position with Robertson being the default sort of left wing back at international level as well.
Yeah. So it's not completely foreign to him. But even if it was, I would say that he's of a skill level relative to the level that he's playing at, that he should be a dominant force. And I think, again, Alan will get into that. I think he's emerging as a dominant force, just not in the way that we all kind of remember him being when he was 19, 20 years old. So it's just a different beast, so to speak. Nygren is the other obvious one. I think that, we talked about this when we were speculating as to why we thought Rodgers should be shifting to something like a 3-4-2-1, is that him and Balikwisha probably suited those kind of inverted forward / number 10 roles that are just ironically, wink, 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 maybe, what Nancy deploys often. I think, again, coherent what he's done with Maeda and McCowan, where out of possession, they're in different positions than in possession. So they almost switch roles. And Alan talked about that last week on our live show. Thanks again, everybody. Should have said this. Everyone that joined us live last week, we'll have more of those in the future, hopefully. So I think McCowan has, been doing well. I think Yang has been doing well. Trusty has been doing well. I think McGregor is well suited for this role in this system. I think he needs somebody next to him that's much better suited for him to really be able to play. And I think he needs coached. I think he's the type of player that if he were in a positive way incentivized to be more aggressive, I think he has the ability to do it. I think he's very much become kind of a passive, simple, low-risk passer in this pivot role. And I think he's got so much more that could be unleashed in playing these diagonal balls and making the runs. And I put a video in our chat area on huddlebreakdown.com that showed an example of a sequence in our prior Motherwell game as we're getting geared up for Motherwell, where him and Hatate had a just brilliant opportunity if you were a relational Nancy system, and would have opened up their defense probably. And it was a simple little kind of 5-yard pass. But that's not the way that we've played, and the risk aversion to recycle and pass to the wide open guy versus a guy who might only have 2 or 3 yards on his defender, but he's open. It's just, and it's got to be a good pass, but it's not like, it's not me making the pass. It's professional football. You'd think you'd be able to make a 3 or 4 yard pass to a teammate. So I think McGregor has been okay, but could be a lot better as this continues to kind of launch. And though Yang, I said, the two glaring areas, unfortunately, are the two big ends of the pitch that are oftentimes the most important, which are striker and keeper. Those are the two that I think we have a lot of work to do on in order to kind of suit how Nancy plays. But I think it's very encouraging that we have, all these people are now talking about square peg, round holes. I think we actually have a lot more round pegs in round holes in this system, with some really glaring exceptions that hopefully get resolved or addressed with some combination of the transfer window and then people returning from injury.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I think myself included, a lot of us were scrambling for Schmeichel to be dropped and Sinisalo to be put in his place. And having watched Sinisalo against Livingston, I'm not entirely convinced he's the answer either. So we remain to be convinced of that. Maybe Ross Doohan will make an appearance instead of just being there for whatever European rules he's required to be there for. The cynic in me suggests that might be the reason for the signing. But hey-ho. Allegedly. We move on anyway. We'll get to Motherwell in a second, but Alan, I just wanted to come back to you about Kieran Tierney specifically. James mentioned the positivity of the fact that he was involved in so many passes against Livingston, the fact that a lot of our play is going through him, and that seems to be no accident because he is perhaps technically one of, if not the most gifted footballer at the club at the moment. I think a lot of people are struggling to assess whether they think he's having a good season because of what James mentioned, the fact that he's having to slightly change the way that he does play. He's not this marauding fullback who bombs up and down the touchline the way that he used to do when he was younger. Probably can't expect him to do that anyway because of his injury history at this point. Where do you stand on the season he's having and how he fits in under Nancy? Are you pleased with what you're seeing from him?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's definitely in the right place. I think that role. I mean, he sent to use old-fashioned football vernacular. He basically ran the game from left centre back, which is pretty rare in any modern football, really. I mean, and I always hark back to the most statistically outlierish performances I ever saw, or ever captured in data. Let's put it that way. And I even saw, to be fair. Aren't sort of great goal scoring feats, or even Montano having 6 shots against Celtic. I mean, that's pretty rare, by the way. The Livingston left back, crikey. It was, if you remember, people may remember there were occasions.
Yeah,
he was the left back.
I didn't even know that, by the way. Anyway,
there was 3 or 4 occasions when Callum McGregor played left back for Celtic, and he absolutely dominated the football to a ridiculous. There was one game I think he did it twice where he got near 150 passes, which is just absurd. I mean, that's like that's like peak Xavi in Barcelona's kind of team of the mid 2000s. Just obscene. That's from left back, and Tierney's performances, which is a different style of player, are similar to that. I think, and given he's a left back, I think he's given the ball away. I think about over 40 times in 3 matches in terms of misplaced passes, because he's encouraged to play quite aggressive passes as well. Try and get balls in behind, try and get balls in, as we mentioned, these sort of diagonal balls that cut teams open on the diagonal rather than in a straight line. Far more potent. So he's being that sort of deep playmaker really for the team, and I think it suits him. It suits his skill set. But there is obviously a counterpoint to that. So if I just bring up a piece here, which what was glaringly obvious at the weekend was the imbalance between the right-hand side and the left-hand side of Celtic's play with the ball I'm talking about. So not only were we badly exposed on the right defensively, the first 2 goals came down that side ultimately from individual errors from the 2 players we mentioned, but in terms of ball progression, it was pretty stark really. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the sort of packing scores from the effectively the left-hand side of the team against Aberdeen, and the right-hand side, and then the same against the Livingston game. And now the Aberdeen game was pretty imbalanced in that it was nearly double, or certainly probably half the number again, passing score from the left-hand side than from the right. And against Livingston, that was more than double really. So this speaks to the fact that on the left-hand side, as I say, Maeda and McCowan have got this lovely relationship now where they, as I say, one out of possession, they switch, and McCowan plays as an effective left wing back, and Maeda presses from the front, and then in possession, Maeda gives the width, and does the thing that he's comfortable doing, which is cutting in on the diagonal from the left-hand side into the box, and McCowan drops inside and plays in his sort of number 10 role. And he's having a whale of a time. I mean, McCowan just looks so happy. He's getting loads of the ball. He's doing loads of stuff. So, of course, the left-hand side is functioning really well. And, of course, McGregor tends to be on that side. And then you've got Tierney, the playmaker, essentially, on that left-hand side. So the left-hand side looking really good, but the right-hand side, in comparison, is a bit of a desert. Because you've got Ralston, who we know is a fairly prosaic player on the ball. You've got Yang, great energy, great attitude. But again, you're not going to get a lot of great decisions on the ball. You've got Engels, who sometimes struggles to get on the ball, etc. So that right-hand side is just a bit of a toxic combination, dare I say, in terms of ball progression. The one on the right-hand side is actually expected scoring contribution. Now, I would have expected that, given the ball is mainly on the left, people who are benefiting from crosses, passes, balls coming into the box would be the people on the right, and that therefore their expected scoring contributions would be higher. But as you can see, again, both against Aberdeen and against Livingston, not the sort of dichotomy that you see on pack passing, but on the left hand side, we're actually creating better chances and getting better shots off to a much lesser degree of difference from the left hand side than we are on the right hand side. So this is something that Nancy's going to have to address. How do you sort of balance that up a little bit so that you're not too predictable and not everything going down the left hand side, getting a bit more threat on that right hand side. That's one of the areas that it may well be recruitment. Although, as we mentioned before we came on, I don't know what Simpson Pusey has done, but the brief time I saw him, he looked like a pretty good, tall, fast, agile player, decent on the ball. Versus Ralston, I still maintain that Engels would be a better bet as the right wing back than Yang. You've got someone like Bernardo to come in. I don't think he would be any worse than Engels is, frankly, sitting beside McGregor. So I think you can fix some of these things in the short term, but there's areas there in terms of recruitment in the upcoming window.
Yeah, interesting. The Simpson Pusey one is such a strange one, and one of these ones that I'll always be scratching my head. Another one is, and I'll be watching them again tonight after we finish this recording. I watched Birmingham at the weekend, and Iwata, although it wasn't one of his best games, looked really dynamic and really hardworking. And people question the standard of the Championship. It's miles above most of the Scottish Premiership, so he's another one I'm left scratching my head how it didn't work out for at Celtic. But you could name a list of players as long as your arm that's happened for that I don't know we'll ever necessarily get the answer to. James, let's look ahead to Motherwell. Now, I was about to say they're in third place. I believe Rangers overtook them the other night to go back into third place. So without having a table in front of me, they're either third or fourth. We are going away from home against them tomorrow night or Wednesday night at the time of recording. Is it too simple to say that it's a difficult one simply because it's away from home against a team who've been having a good season? Where do you stand on how difficult it's likely to be for us?
It'll be interesting to see what Askew comes up with, and if he alters the way that he's played against us and kind of more well-resourced teams like Rangers, etc. Generally speaking, they're we did an interview with John Muller, who's a soccer journalist, fellow American. And back, I think that was September we recorded that, Alan, something like that. And really fascinating conversation about, part of it was the kind of industry trends on tactics and how smaller teams, and when I say smaller, less resourced clubs like Motherwell, St. John's that came up in the conversation, they're on kind of the tail end of this Pep Guardiola positional play adoption, and that they're now starting to play this way. And some of them, like Motherwell, being extremely well coached. It looks like they're looking to do their own little Bodo Glimt thing. Like that's my analog for Motherwell if things really work out well. That seems to be what they're, focus on youth development and some smart recruitment and really get good at playing a specific style of play. But that comes with the fact that our style of play is actually pretty good at ripping that apart. If we don't make a ton of mistakes. So that's the big issue here, right? That's the huge if, and it's a major qualifier. I recognize that because we are absolutely vulnerable to mistakes right now because of the newness of the system, because guys may not be as comfortable at times, some more so than others, like, Anthony Ralston, like Engels, I would argue to a degree. So it really depends on how it breaks. They haven't been a kind of crazy front-footed pressing team, which would actually make me a little more concerned. So they've been they're very smart at pressing. They're good at pressing, but they're not one of these that kind of like what David Martin did. Why I was on the margin. I talked about this last week when we previewed Livingston at the end of our live show. As I said, I was more worried about Livingston's style of play because they would play more like Roma in going man-to-man and pressing really aggressively high. And that's been when we've kind of fallen apart at times against St. Mirren, against Dundee United, when teams really pushed pedal to the metal and did that. I was a betting man on this specific phase of play. I would guess Motherwell probably won't do that. And I think that is to our benefit, and that they will try to build out from the back. And they got into some real trouble against us in early October when we beat them 3-2, trying to play out from their keeper and trying to build out and deal with our press. So they're not going to I should say they're likely not going to be the one that goes long, aerially long. They'll do it selectively. They're smart, but they're not going to do what St. Mirren does, as Alan said. They don't just bypass the midfield as a matter of memory, muscle memory, and just say, we're taking that away from you. They're not going to take away our press and our counter press. So it's going to be active. And I think that's a huge risk to them. So I actually like the matchup from a relative style perspective. Arguably their best player is at AFCON, which is another huge, he's having a huge season. And Mena, I can't say his name. Well, or you're the professional, you can say his name. But I think that can't be understated as to how important that is, that he's an absence for them. So I'm actually kind of bullish going into the game. Probably viewers are going to be ready to jump off a bridge if I say that, because the last time I said that was going into the St. Mirren final. But yeah, that's my analysis. So I think the relative matchups favor us, with the huge caveat that, if we make, the kind of passes that Tierney and McGregor did, where you just basically give a wide open breakaway to the other team, attacking your box, they are well drilled enough that could be seriously problematic. So I could see this being a 5-2, 5-3 kind of game. That wouldn't shock me. So people need to get ready for some entertainment.
I'm ready for it. And just for anybody who, before you jump down my throat in the comments, the game is tomorrow night, not Wednesday night. It's Tuesday night. It's just correcting myself there.
We're recording Monday. Is today Monday? What day of the
week? Today's Monday. We're in that weird little bit between Christmas and New Year where all the days are getting mixed up. Today, as we record, is Monday. The game is Tuesday. Just in case anybody blames me for turning up on the wrong day for the game. Alan, just to close out, your thoughts on Motherwell. I think you were nodding along with a lot of what James was saying, and their manager, to be fair to him, has been getting a lot of plaudits for what he's been able to get out of the team in terms of results and the way he's getting them to play, considering the ability of the majority of the players at his disposal. Do you see this being a particularly challenging game for us? Will it be our own self-inflicted sort of wins likely, or do Motherwell pose a real threat?
Every game's challenging with this group of players that we have available. That's the sad truth of it. Well, it's exciting for the league. All of the top teams, in theory, you wouldn't be surprised if they lost to any other team in the league, and it's not very many years that we've been able to say that in this league. So I guess from a neutral point of view, that's a good thing. But if we quickly look at Motherwell, James has made a lot of the points, really, so I won't repeat. But so if we look at style of play, again, red doesn't mean bad here, green doesn't mean good. It's just indicative of style. what this profile is showing you is this is a team with a very clear identity, a very clear way of playing. It's high possession football, high pass completion rates. And to echo James's point about the pressing, now bearing in mind that they have the third highest possession of any team in the league, therefore you might expect that they have low volumes of pressures, and indeed they do. They're ninth in the league for pressing, but they're fourth in the league for pressure regains. What that says to me is that they're very clever about when they press and very good at setting traps for the opposition. So this is an alert there, right? And it's the same with counter pressures. They're only sixth in the league for volume of counter pressures, but they're second in the league for winning the ball back. So they're going to try and lull teams into certain areas in the pitch. And this is very much a case of playing smart rather than, as we saw at the weekend, really just try and, brute force it with sheer effort and press all the time. So, and again, as James says, what is really admirable is that playing this way I don't remember the last time Motherwell played this style of football, generally being one of the more direct teams in the league. So he's implemented this style upon a group of players who are nowhere near the resources that, for example, Russell Martin had at the Rangers, where he was trying to implement a very similar style of play, really, and completely failed. So that may suggest to you that Asku is a better manager and a better communicator and a better influencer of footballers. And for whatever reason, the players at Motherwell have A, adapted quickly, and B, gone along on this journey and implemented it really well. So it just goes to show that it's not all about the wage packet in terms of predicting whether these things will work out or not. If we go on to their defensive side of the game, so there's a couple of things here really that I would draw attention to. There's a couple of bits of positive variance really. So they've got the most positive difference between expected goals and goals scored. So they've had a nice bit of variance there. They're actually top of the league in that, meaning that they've probably scored more goals than you'd expect to a greater degree. I mean, almost half a goal a game more than what you would expect. So that's some really nice positive variance for them. And then at the other end of the pitch, their goalkeeper is fourth in the league in terms of the value that he's adding, which again is a nice piece of variance. Otherwise, this is a story of they get into a lot of good positions. They get into the final third a lot. They counterattack quite well. They take a good number of shots from inside the box versus out. They're not particularly dangerous from set pieces. The 10th in the league for XG created from set pieces. But in terms of execution, in terms of actually goal scoring, it's a little bit of positive variance rather than any signs of clinical finishing, I would say, in terms of things like average XG per shot is kind of average, really. So attacking wise, I would say they're pretty solid, probably fourth, fifth best team defending wise, probably fourth, fifth best team in the league. From an attacking point of view, I think this is where they have more of their challenges. Really, is being able to get all that possession that they have and turn it into goals. And actually, their most, I suppose, totemic and the striker with the most personality, Maswanise, he's at AFCON, as James said. That's a huge miss for them because he really is that sort of X factor. He's the one that gives them that little bit of difference. He can beat a man. He can do the unexpected. He can score goals from lots of different areas. So basically, again, without labouring the point, this is a profile of a pretty average attack in terms of the league. So great possession, pretty strong, reasonably good defence. But this is where they kind of fall down a little bit. So James is expecting lots of goals. I suspect that will mean that Celtic have made lots of mistakes because, especially without Maswanise, this isn't a team that's really scoring a lot of goals, or even looks like it on an average basis compared to the rest of the league. So I'm like James. I'm kind of thinking this is quite a good matchup for Celtic. They're not great defensively or in attack on set pieces. They'll try and keep the ball in play. In fact, no team keeps the ball in play more. And as we know, when Celtic have the ball in play a lot, we tend to get more possession, more attacks, etc. So, yeah, let's be positive.
Listen, after that opening 10 minutes against Livingston, all rules are out the window. That was the craziest opening 10 match I think I've ever seen. James, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, I was just the before we get too positive, is I think a major thing that could make this an unpleasant day is that when we talk about their kind of pressing structure, they're going to go, as I called it last season, the Bruges model, which is they're going to man mark our central midfielders, kind of let our center backs have the ball, try to funnel them. I'm guessing, because Askew is a smart manager, most of that will be tried to funnel it to the right. And then man mark McGregor, Engels, and probably even the wing back, and shut down passing lanes. And this comes down to something I've talked about for a year and a half now, is that our player population is not particularly good at getting open when they're man marked. And the people delivering those balls, particularly Trusty and Ralston, even Tierney to a degree, what Nancy's asking them to do is to play the ball to guys who are marked. And that is the essence of his style that is different than what positional play under Rodgers and even Ange to a certain degree, which is if you have a yard or two of space, you're open. You got to deliver the ball and then play the quick 1-2s, and you got to be close together and use that kind of quick movement and smart passing to get out of the press. So there's risk to that in that we're going to try those balls like McGregor did that, what was he thinking kind of things. So when guys are trying things new, you're like, where the hell did that come from? We could see a few of those because of this man marking regime. Again, before we get over our skis and huge optimism, and that also feeds to why I could see them scoring a couple of times, is I fully expect there to be some jailbreaks off of midfield screw ups in trying to get this more intricate passing and just guys, breaking. To Alan's point, can they convert that? That's going to be, I think, a huge question mark.
That's something I'll definitely remind my dad of the next time we're watching it, because he was near having a heart attack against Livingston the other day because we kept passing it to McGregor when he was facing our own goal with a guy bearing down on him, and it was just very, very stressful.
You have his tablets ready.
Laura,
nitroglycerin, right?
So again, in terms of what things to look out for, in terms of how Nancy wants his team to play, one of which would be that exactly what you're talking about. Playing the ball to players who are actually under pressure, but then you move off the pass, and it's that movement that's key as well, and that's how you then have space to break into. By following McGregor, there's probably a huge space behind where McGregor came from. So how do you then maneuver the ball into that space? And then the second thing that I was increasingly seeing against Livingston is that even Sinisalo, when he had the ball at his feet, they're provoking the press. They were standing on the ball, waiting to be pressured. And only when the player was close to them would they then move the ball. Again, provoking the press, drawing players forward, creating space in behind, but you've then got to shift it quickly. So I think we'll see more and more of this, but it's a bit like pressing without the ball, playing this style of football with the ball. It requires, understanding. It requires communication. It requires, don't pass it to McGregor's right foot. Don't pass it to Negrin's right foot if you want a quick pass back, right? You got to think about all these things, and they have to start almost become automations, because you're used to playing with these players in this way, and it will take time. It just will take time.
Based on that, I think I'll be telling my dad to skip the match tomorrow night, because that'll not be good for his health. Thank you very much, James and Alan, for joining me. You guys will be back later in the week, obviously, with a look at the Rangers game up ahead. Thank you, as James touched on earlier. We did a live stream last week, and the engagement and positivity and sort of chat that we got from everybody who joined us on that live stream was really encouraging to see, and I think I speak for the three of us when I say that we really enjoyed it. Martin joined us on that one as well, so it was nice to have the four of us on the show, or I certainly thought so. So we will hopefully do more of those in the future. Alan, where can people find us? How can they sign up? And what kind of content is available for them?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, please, it makes a huge difference, apparently. If you want us to beat those nasty algorithms, then please please comment, please rate on applications that allow you to rate the show. Leaving comments is fantastic as well. It all helps to increase engagement. It helps us to kind of to grow and so forth. So that's the first thing to say. Secondly, yeah, we'll probably be recording the preview of the derby coming up at the weekend, I think on Friday, so maybe expect to see that landing on the Saturday, very early, probably on the Saturday, because Andy's in the US, so he can get that out in the early hours. So we'll have a full day on the Saturday to hopefully for you to enjoy that on your dog walking duties, which is what a lot of people seem to do when they're listening to us. But otherwise, there will be full content as always coming throughout the week in written form before the next podcast. And with the new year coming up, if you want to celebrate the new year by the giving of gifts, you can gift a subscription to your nearest and dearest, or even someone you really don't like and want to annoy. That is also okay.
Yeah, their money's as good as anybody's, so that's absolutely fine. Thank you, James. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and we will see you again very, very soon.